The frontier waste stretched endlessly under a pale orange sky, a landscape of rusted metal towers and broken starship hulls half buried in crimson sand. This was where old wars came to die, where the remnants of humanity's conflicts with a dozen alien species lay scattered like forgotten toys. Thomas Reed walked carefully through the debris field, his boots crunching on fractured glass and corroded steel. He had been a salvage runner for 8 years now, ever since the peace treaties ended his military service, and he knew these fields better than most people knew their own homes. His scanning device beeped softly as he swept it over a collapsed cargo hauler. Nothing valuable. Just more worthless scrap that would cost more to haul than it was worth. Thomas sighed and wiped sweat from his forehead. The twin suns were particularly brutal today, and his water reserves were running low. Maybe it was time to head back to the settlement. Another day, another handful of credits that barely kept him fed. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the howling wind. A whimper. Soft and desperate. Thomas froze, his hand instinctively moving to the plasma cutter on his belt. The wastes were dangerous. Raiders, wild creatures, and automated defense systems from the war still prowled these ruins. But that sound was different. It was the cry of something small and frightened. He followed the noise to a partially collapsed storage container, its doors bent inward from some ancient impact. The whimpering grew louder as he approached. Thomas knelt beside the opening and carefully aimed his flashlight inside. What he saw made him catch his breath. 4 small figures huddled together in the darkness, their eyes reflecting his light like tiny stars. At first, he thought they might be some kind of animal, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized the truth: they were dragon hatchlings. Not the massive war beasts that flew through legends, but small creatures no bigger than human children. Their scales shimmered in colors he had never seen before: deep emerald green on one, brilliant sapphire blue on another, warm amber gold on the third, and the smallest had scales of pearl white that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Each had tiny wings folded against their backs, delicate and translucent like butterfly wings. Small horns crowned their heads, and their faces held an intelligence that made Thomas's heart ache. The green-scaled one stepped forward slightly, placing herself between Thomas and the others. She was clearly the eldest, perhaps 7 or 8 in human years if he had to guess. Her golden eyes studied him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Behind her, the blue-scaled hatchling held the smallest one close, and Thomas could see that the white-scaled child was injured. Her left foreleg bent at an unnatural angle, and she trembled with fever. "Please," the green one spoke, her voice high and musical but filled with exhaustion. "We need help. Our mother told us to hide here while she fought the metal birds, but she has not returned. Many suns have passed, and Ivory grows worse." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. Metal birds. She must mean the automated defense drones that still patrolled certain sections of the wastes. Those things were programmed to attack anything with a draconic signature, a holdover from the war when dragons had fought alongside one of humanity's enemies. If their mother had engaged a swarm of them, she was likely dead or badly wounded somewhere in this maze of wreckage. "How long have you been here?" Thomas asked gently, already pulling off his pack. 7 suns, the amber-scaled one answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "We had water from the rain 2 suns ago, but it is gone. Ivory cannot eat. She only sleeps. 7 days." These children had survived 7 days alone in one of the most hostile environments on the planet. Thomas reached into his pack and pulled out his emergency medical kit and his last ration of water. "My name is Thomas," he said slowly. "What are your names?" The green-scaled leader tilted her head, considering whether to trust him. Finally, she spoke. "I am Jade. The blue one is River. The amber is Ember. And the white one is Ivory. Our mother is Celestine of the High Mountains, and she told us that some humans have honor in their hearts." Her eyes searched his face. "Are you such a human?" Thomas thought about the question. He had done things during the war he wasn't proud of. He had followed orders that still haunted his dreams. But here, now, faced with 4 terrified children who had no one else, the answer seemed clear. "I hope so," he said honestly. "Will you let me help your sister?" Jade looked back at her siblings, some silent communication passing between them. River nodded slowly. Ember clutched Ivory tighter. Finally, Jade turned back to him. "You may approach. But if you harm her, we will fight you." Thomas almost smiled at the fierce determination in such a small voice. "Fair enough." He crawled carefully into the container, moving slowly to avoid startling them. Up close, he could see how thin they were, their scales dull from dehydration and malnutrition. Ivory's breathing was shallow and rapid, and when he gently touched her foreleg, she barely stirred. The break was bad, and infection had set in. Without proper treatment, she wouldn't survive another day. Working with the steady hands of someone who had patched up countless soldiers under fire, Thomas cleaned the wound with antiseptic from his kit. The hatchlings watched in silence as he carefully set the bone and wrapped it with a splint made from pieces of lightweight alloy he found in the container. Ivory whimpered once but didn't wake. Thomas gave her a small dose of pain medication, hoping dragon physiology was similar enough to human that it wouldn't harm her. "She needs real medical care," Thomas said, carefully wrapping Ivory in his jacket. "Food, clean water, and medicine I don't have here. My shelter is 2 miles from here. Will you come with me?" Jade's eyes widened. "But Mother said to wait. She said she would return." Thomas chose his words carefully. "Your mother sounds like a wise and powerful dragon. But if she could return, she would have by now. Something is keeping her away. The best way to honor her wishes is to stay alive until she can find you again. I have a communications beacon at my shelter. We can leave a signal here so she'll know where you've gone." The logic seemed to reach Jade. She looked at her sisters, at Ivory's pale face, and made a decision. "We will go with you, Thomas Reed of the humans. But you must promise to help us find our mother." Thomas met her gaze steadily. "I promise I'll try." The journey back to Thomas's shelter tested everyone's endurance. He carried Ivory gently against his chest, feeling her faint heartbeat through the jacket. Jade walked beside him with determined steps, refusing to show weakness despite her obvious exhaustion. River and Ember held onto Thomas's belt, their small claws gripping the fabric as they struggled through the shifting sand and jagged debris. The wind picked up as they walked, carrying stinging particles of rust and dust that made breathing difficult. Thomas's shelter was built into the hull of a destroyed cruiser, one of the larger vessels that had crashed during the final battles of the war. He had spent months making it livable, sealing the hull breaches, installing a water recycler, and setting up solar panels that charged during the day. It wasn't much, but it was safe and relatively comfortable. As they approached, he used his remote to open the airlock door. The hatchling stopped at the entrance, staring at the dark opening with uncertainty. Thomas understood their hesitation. He was asking them to enter what was essentially a metal cave with a stranger. "The air inside is clean and cool," he said softly. "There's a medical bay where I can treat Ivory properly, and food in the storage unit. You'll be safe here." Jade looked up at him, her golden eyes ancient beyond her years. "Do you live alone, Thomas Reed?" "Yes," he admitted. "It's just me out here." "That must be lonely," River said quietly, speaking for the first time since they had left the container. Thomas felt something catch in his throat. "Sometimes," he said. "But right now, I'm grateful for the company." That seemed to decide them. Jade stepped through the airlock first, her sisters following closely behind. Thomas came last, securing the door behind them. The shelter's lights flickered on automatically, revealing a space that was sparse but clean. The main room held a work table covered in salvaged parts, a small cooking area, and a sleeping alcove. A second room housed the medical bay and storage units. Thomas carried Ivory straight to the medical bay, laying her gently on the examination platform. The diagnostic scanner was one of his prized possessions, salvaged from a destroyed hospital ship. He activated it, watching as holographic displays appeared around Ivory's small form, showing her vital signs and internal systems. The readings made him wince. Advanced infection, severe malnutrition, dehydration, and the broken bone had started to calcify incorrectly. "Is she dying?" Ember asked from the doorway, her voice breaking. Thomas looked at the 3 conscious hatchlings who had crowded into the medical bay. They deserved honesty. "She's very sick," he said. "But I have medicine and equipment here that can help. I'm going to do everything I can to save her." He worked through the night, administering antibiotics and nutrients through an intravenous line, using a bone regeneration unit to reset the fracture properly, and monitoring Ivory's vital signs constantly. The other 3 hatchlings refused to leave, curling up together on the floor beside the medical platform. Thomas gave them water and emergency rations, which they ate slowly, unused to human food but too hungry to be particular. As dawn broke outside, painting the wasteland in shades of orange and red, Ivory's fever finally began to break. Her breathing became stronger and more regular. The diagnostic scanner showed the infection retreating under the assault of antibiotics. Thomas leaned back in his chair, exhausted but relieved. "She's going to make it," he said quietly. Jade lifted her head from where she had been resting it on her folded arms. Tears tracked down her scaled cheeks, sparkling like diamonds in the soft medical bay lights. "Thank you, Thomas Reed. You have saved our sister's life. This is a debt we can never repay." "You don't owe me anything," Thomas said, surprised by how much he meant it. "Just get better, all of you. That's payment enough." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Thomas would wake early to check on Ivory, whose recovery was remarkable once she had proper care. The little white-scaled hatchling was shy and quiet, but she smiled at him when he changed her bandages, a small flash of pointed teeth that was somehow endearing. The other 3 explored the shelter with cautious curiosity, asking endless questions about human technology and Thomas's life. Jade was the leader, intelligent and protective of her sisters. She helped Thomas with small tasks around the shelter, her small claws surprisingly dexterous. River was the thoughtful one, spending hours staring at the technical manuals Thomas kept, somehow understanding the diagrams despite never having seen human writing before. Ember was the emotional heart of the group, quick to laugh and cry, constantly humming the draconic comfort songs that filled the shelter with haunting music. Thomas found himself talking to them more than he had talked to anyone in years. He told them about the war, carefully editing the worst parts, and about the worlds he had seen before everything fell apart. They told him about their home in the high mountains, a place of crystal caves and thermal springs where dragons had lived for thousands of years. They described their mother Celestine, powerful and wise, with scales that shimmered like starlight. "She was taking us to the southern colonies," Jade explained one evening as they ate dinner together. Thomas had found that the hatchlings could eat processed protein if he added certain minerals to it. "There are other dragon families there, far from human territories. But the metal birds attacked our ship. Mother told us to hide in the escape pod while she fought them off. We crashed here." Thomas had been searching the salvage databases and emergency channels every day, looking for any sign of a dragon matching Celestine's description. So far, nothing. But he hadn't given up. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. "We'll find her," he said with more confidence than he felt. On the 7th day after he found them, Ivory was strong enough to leave the medical bay. She wobbled on unsteady legs, her wings still healing but no longer causing her pain. Ember and River supported her, and together they stepped into the main room where morning light streamed through the reinforced windows. Ivory's pearl scales seemed to glow in the sunlight, and for the first time, Thomas saw her smile fully. "Thank you, kind Thomas," she said in her tiny voice. "You fixed my wing." Something in Thomas's chest that had been frozen for years began to thaw. These weren't just hatchlings he had rescued. They were becoming family. The realization should have scared him, but instead, it felt right. For the first time since the war ended, he had a purpose beyond simple survival, but that afternoon, as he was teaching the hatchlings how to play a human card game, his long-range scanner began beeping urgently. Something large was approaching from the east. Something that registered as draconic but far more powerful than the hatchlings. Thomas felt his blood run cold as he checked the readings again. Whatever was coming was massive, moving fast, and based on the energy signature. Incredibly angry, Jade heard the scanner and went very still. Her golden eyes met Thomas's, and he saw recognition and fear in them. "Mother," she whispered. "She is coming." "That is not all that matters to many," Celestine replied. She shifted her weight, wincing slightly from her injuries. "The war taught both our species to fear each other. Yet here you stand, having cared for 4 dragon hatchlings as if they were your own young. This requires acknowledgement." She moved closer, and Thomas had to fight every instinct that screamed at him to run. Celestine lowered her head until one massive eye was level with his face. "In my culture, a life debt is sacred. You saved my daughter's life, and by extension, you preserved all 4 of my children. By rights, I owe you a debt that can only be repaid with fire and blood. Do you understand what this means?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "I don't want payment. I'm just glad they're safe." Something like a smile crossed Celestine's draconic features. "Which is precisely why you deserve it. Thomas Reed, I name you friend of the dragon clans. If you ever have need, call upon me, and I will answer. This I swear by the ancient peaks and eternal fires." A warmth spread through Thomas's chest, and he realized something fundamental had just shifted. Not just for him, but perhaps for relations between their species. "Thank you," he managed. "That's more than I expected." However, Celestine continued, and her tone became more serious. "I must ask why you were alone out here. The frontier wastes are no place for solitary humans. Do you have no clan? No family?" Thomas felt the old pain resurface. "The war took everything from that. I'm a salvage runner now. It's a living. A lonely living," Celestine observed, echoing River's earlier words. She was quiet for a moment, then seemed to reach a decision. "My daughters and I are traveling to the southern colonies, as Jade may have mentioned. The journey will take many weeks. The routes through the wastes are treacherous, filled with remnants of war that even I cannot safely navigate alone while protecting 4 young ones." Thomas saw where this was going. "You want a guide?" "I want a partner," Celestine corrected. "Someone who knows these ruins and their dangers. Someone my daughters already trust. In return, I can offer protection and, when we reach the colonies, introduction to the dragon merchant clans. The trade opportunities alone would set you up for life." It was a generous offer, almost too generous. Thomas looked at the 4 hatchlings, who were watching this exchange with hopeful eyes. He thought about his empty shelter, his lonely existence scraping by in the wastes. He thought about the way Ivory had smiled at him this morning, and how Jade had called him a human of honor. He thought about the possibility of something more than just survival. "When do we leave?" he asked. Jade let out a happy trill, and the other hatchlings joined in, creating a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Celestine's eyes gleamed with approval. "Tomorrow at dawn. Tonight, we rest and prepare. I must warn you, Thomas Reed, the journey ahead will be dangerous. Not all humans welcome dragons traveling through their territories. Not all dragons trust humans. We will face challenges." "I've faced challenges before," Thomas said with more confidence than he felt. "I'll manage." "That is not all that matters to many," Celestine replied. She shifted her weight, wincing slightly from her injuries. "The war taught both our species to fear each other. Yet here you stand, having cared for 4 dragon hatchlings as if they were your own young. This requires acknowledgement." She moved closer, and Thomas had to fight every instinct that screamed at him to run. Celestine lowered her head until one massive eye was level with his face. In my culture, a life debt is sacred. You saved my daughter's life, and by extension, you preserved all 4 of my children. By rights, I owe you a debt that can only be repaid with fire and blood. Do you understand what this means? Thomas shook his head slowly. I don't want payment. I'm just glad they're safe. Something like a smile crossed Celestine's draconic features. Which is precisely why you deserve it. Thomas Reed, I name you friend of the Dragon clans. If you ever have need, call upon me, and I will answer. This I swear by the ancient peaks and eternal fires. A warmth spread through Thomas's chest, and he realized something fundamental had just shifted. Not just for him, but perhaps for relations between their species. Thank you, he managed. That's more than I expected. However, Celestine continued, and her tone became more serious. I must ask why you were alone out here. The frontier wastes are no place for solitary humans. Do you have no clan? No family? Thomas felt the old pain resurface. The war took everything from that. I'm a salvage runner now. It's a living. A lonely living, Celestine observed, echoing River's earlier words. She was quiet for a moment, then seemed to reach a decision. My daughters and I are traveling to the southern colonies, as Jade may have mentioned. The journey will take many weeks. The routes through the wastes are treacherous, filled with remnants of war that even I cannot safely navigate alone while protecting 4 young ones. Thomas saw where this was going. You want a guide? I want a partner, Celestine corrected. Someone who knows these ruins and their dangers. Someone my daughters already trust. In return, I can offer protection and, when we reach the colonies, introduction to the dragon merchant clans. The trade opportunities alone would set you up for life. It was a generous offer, almost too generous. Thomas looked at the 4 hatchlings, who were watching this exchange with hopeful eyes. He thought about his empty shelter, his lonely existence scraping by in the wastes. He thought about the way Ivory had smiled at him this morning, and how Jade had called him a human of honor. He thought about the possibility of something more than just survival. When do we leave? He asked. Jade let out a happy trill, and the other hatchlings joined in, creating a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Celestine's eyes gleamed with approval. Tomorrow at dawn. Tonight, we rest and prepare. I must warn you, Thomas Reed, the journey ahead will be dangerous. Not all humans welcome dragons traveling through their territories. Not all dragons trust humans. We will face challenges. I've faced challenges before, Thomas said with more confidence than he felt. I'll manage. I believe you will, Celestine agreed. She turned to her daughters. Come, little ones. Let us hunt and eat properly. Thomas Reed, you are welcome to join us if you can stomach roasted sand serpent. As the sun set over the frontier wastes, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, an unlikely family gathered for dinner. A dragon mother, still healing from battle, telling stories of the high mountains. 4 hatchlings, chattering excitedly about their adventure and their new friend. And 1 human salvage runner who had woken up that morning expecting another ordinary day of loneliness and survival, only to find his entire life transformed by a simple act of compassion. Tomorrow would bring the start of a long journey filled with unknown dangers and challenges. But tonight, in the warm glow of a cooking fire beneath an alien sky, Thomas Reed felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt hope. He felt purpose. Most importantly, he felt like he belonged somewhere again. The war had taken everything from him, but perhaps peace was offering something better in return. A chance at redemption, adventure, and a family that crossed the boundaries of species. As Ivory curled up against his side, her pearl scales warm and smooth, and Jade leaned her head on his shoulder while River and Ember debated which human game they wanted to learn next, Thomas made a silent vow. Whatever challenges lay ahead on the road to the southern colonies, he would face them. Not as a soldier following orders. Not as a lonely salvage runner scraping by. But as a protector, a friend, and part of something larger than himself. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, ancient and eternal, witnessing this small moment of connection in an infinite universe. And somewhere in the ruins around them, old enemies and new dangers waited. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight was for rest, for family, and for the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would change everything.